Guyton, man, and I'm here with my producer slash host slash analyst slash expert, my man Austin Platt, and we're going to talk a little Indiana basketball. How you doing, first of all, Austin? How's it going this week?
I'm doing well, man. It's feast week. It's been a great week for IU athletics. Of course, IU basketball is right in there as well. And hey, I'm glad to be on for the first time, and it's been off to a great start.
I saw women's basketball won, soccer won, football won, men's basketball won, volleyball won. Am I missing any? I don't want anybody to be left out.
Wrestling, they beat Princeton the other day at Assembly Hall, so it was like one of the best weekends ever.
Wrestling handling been a shout out to all the student athletes at Indiana University. Hey man, there's no reason why those streets shouldn't be filled with partying this weekend. So, but no, get back to you business, get back in the gyms, get back on the fields, keep it going, and we are proud of you guys, man. You made us all smile this week. But man, I realized that I've done probably 55 episodes, maybe somewhere around there. I don't know, I'm guessing, and I never really did an episode of personally myself to talk about my expectations and my vision of Indiana basketball, and I've decided this would be a great time to do it. It's holidays. I want to leave my some of the guys that I want to interview, I want to leave them alone this week, and so they can get full and they can eat and enjoy their families, not to worry about jumping on a Zoom. So I decided me and you will go ahead and give our thoughts on Indiana basketball so far in this young season. So man, first let's talk a little bit about. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about last year, just a little bit, where the Hoosiers, I think they finished 21-14. They got in the play-in game, won the game against Wyoming, ended up losing in the second in the next game. Refresh my memory. Who did they lose to?
St. Mary's.
St. Mary's ended up a good St. Mary's team that plays well out there and against teams such like Gonzaga. So they had a great run in the Big Ten tournament at the end. I think the Big Ten tournament run really salvaged the season. That's what it looked like from my end. As it looked like, they had the debacle at Northwestern where Mike Woodson had to do what he had to do. It kind of cost them in the race. Almost cost them in the race. But that strong finish in that Big Ten run, and particularly the games against Michigan and the games against Iowa, really solidified their spot in the NCAA tournament. Because back in the day, you didn't get in with 14 losses. Back in the day, like that was like, wow, you was NIT bound. So, they were able to overcome that, get in, finish. I think they finished 9-11 in the conference last year. Usually didn't get in with a sub 500 record. So, but they did had a good game against Wyoming in the tournament, and then lost to St. Mary's. But when I look at that season, I think that the culture was established. I think that Mike Woodson did a good job, especially when you're always tested as a coach, and that situation at Northwestern was definitely a test to see was he going to let things slide? Was he going to establish a culture of doing whatever the right things? I don't have the details, don't care to know, but I know something happened where he had to bench a bunch of starters and pretty much cost the team opportunity to win at Northwestern. So you get your players' attention when you do those type of things and letting them know it's all about winning, but it's not all about winning. If we're gonna win, we're gonna win the right way. We're gonna lose gracefully and respectfully, but we're gonna win the right way. We're not gonna win by cheating the system. So when that happened, I thought it was a successful establishment of its culture. I thought the season went as expected, and there were really no surprise to me. I felt like I have been lobbying for a former player to coach Indiana. It's probably since at least 2010. You know what I mean? They finally, settled on Mike Woodson, in 2020. So, I just felt as if only a player who could balance both worlds when it comes to off the floor with Indiana and the responsibilities as an Indiana coach, and on the floor, the new style of play that needed to be established, because truth be told, everybody's looking for the Bob Knight era. And it's a different game nowadays, and you won't see that anymore. But that's what they were accustomed to seeing. And it would take somebody that could fuse both worlds together. And I thought Mike Woodson could be or a former player could be a guy that could see both and say, you know what, we're going to play our usual tough defensive style brand of basketball with positioning and tough toughness, energy, and effort, but also we're going to figure out a way to make a hybrid version of what Indiana basketball used to be, taking good shots, you know what I mean, taking the quality shots, getting the ball inside and playing inside out. And he has brought those things, man. So I thought that, you know, that was just a quick overview year end in review for last year. And we were, I think, as fans and as former players, I think we were satisfied with what we saw. What were some of the things that you thought were instrumental for last year in developing the culture and establishing Indiana basketball again, Austin?
I think you hit the nail right on the head, AJ, with everything you said there. And I'll echo the fact that I think recency bias, I think, played a lot into the expectations for this year. I mean, Indiana was really up and down. And you mentioned the Northwestern game. That was kind of the inflection point on what was that really tough 5-game losing streak where we knew the end of the schedule and the regular season was going to be tough and they couldn't figure out to get that big win. And they had opportunities. And I think the biggest thing last year was they could not win a close game. It felt like there was no close games Indiana won. Purdue was the only exception. And that was the game they really had. They had a really good lead going to half, let it slip away. And then, you know, Rob Finney, of course, turned it himself, really saved Indiana's bacon, really, because they had that game.
Yep.
They tried to lose it, but it felt like there were a lot of games last year where Indiana was so close and just could not get it. You know, the Rutgers game at home where that was a chance to seal the NCAA spot. They lost that one after, you know, the game-winning 3 from Ron Harper Jr. And they had a chance to go in and beat Purdue and sweep them, and they just had that game slip away from them. There were so many close losses, and they finally got one against Michigan, that insane comeback, which saved them because they were destined to go to the NIT. That was written everywhere on the wall after that, you know, horrid first half. And then Illinois, they got a huge win against, you know, a top seed the very next day, less than 24 hours later, and that sealed the deal for them. So the biggest thing was they could not win a close game. And you're right about the culture. Mike Woodson really wanted to bridge the gap between Bob Knight, you know, of course, a guy who he loves and who's really an idol of his, and kind of the present day. And you know, that Northwestern game, I think, really opened a lot of eyes because, you know, I watched the post-game presser and, you know, he was smiling a lot of that time. And I think, you know, of course, he wasn't happy with what happened. He was really mad, but I think it was a lesson to his players and say, you know what? Winning in that game wasn't really the storyline. The storyline was kind of already written, and the fact that he wanted to punish the players, didn't do the right thing, and he wanted to build that gap, to bridge that gap. And, you know, when he got rid of Dan Fife, that I think also kind of opened some eyes. And this is Mike Woodson's team, and he puts a lot of pressure on himself. He puts a lot of pressure on his guys going into this year. And it's because of what Indiana did at the end of last season that proved that they can compete with a lot of the teams in the country. And we're seeing that right now. And Indiana, you know, for the 3rd week in a row is climbing the AP rankings for a good reason.
Absolutely, man. You bring up a bunch of good points about winning and losing close games, you know, especially in the Big Ten, especially when you're trying to fight for NCAA tournament berths, man. You have to win those games. But there was a positive thing with Indiana basketball last year because I could see the maturation. I could see that it mattered. I can see that it bothered them to lose those games. I could see that they were right on the cusp of overcoming those road woes, you know what I mean? So, you know, you make great points, man. And I think, you know, I think we're setting up for a fun ride this year, you know, barring that. I always talk health first. I say nothing matters unless everybody stays healthy. You know, we can all say 3-point shots, rebounding, defense, but if the right players aren't healthy or if we can't plug the right holes because of health, then, you know, you end up right back at the drawing board. So I always pray and ask for health first with any team or any players that I'm supporting. And then after that, you know, and I think obviously as we walk into this new season, man, and, you know, it's early. It's really very early. Played 3 pretty much cupcake games. And the positive thing about these quote-unquote cupcake games is these are games that Indiana kind of struggled with in the past. You know, they would play up to the level of the competition, so to speak, or they just weren't that good. You know, they would, you know, win this game. The game against the game that they just recently played against Miami, they would win that game by 6 points last year, or, you know, instead of handling their business. So the best sign for me was that they came out with a lot of energy and effort, and they put those games away with a strong run early. And it shows that Indiana has a little spurt ability early, you know, and that's key. The key is to go out there. You know, you're going to have the game is full of runs, and everybody knows basketball is a game of runs, and you're going to have the last run or the most runs in order to win the game. So they've shown a lot of spurt ability and ability to lock down defensively, clamp people, holding them under their averages in order to extend those games. Are those what are some of the things you've seen early that you didn't see last year?
I think the biggest thing for me is the bench depth already. We knew that was one of the huge reasons why Indiana struggled last year, particularly in late games, because guys had to play, a large chunk of the minutes, and Mike Woodson did not have a lot of guys you could bring off the bench. And we're already seeing that. I mean, Malik Renew is making a strong case to be in the starting five. Of course, we know the freshmen that he brought in, and we saw three of them really make an impact against Miami of Ohio on that, weird 48-hour turnaround. So I think for me, it's the bench depth. And I think another thing is Indiana has a lot of players who can bring the ball up the floor. And that's something that's huge. It felt like it was Xavier Johnson every time last season. And we're seeing it's much different this year. We're seeing Jalen Hood-Schifino take the ball up the court. We're seeing Trace Jackson-Davis at times take the ball up the floor, as well as Malik Renew and some other guys. So it's the fact that they can spread the offense around and they don't have to rely on Xavier Johnson to be that guy. Mike Woodson has said it this year that he doesn't have to do everything. And I think that's really important because, he's the rock behind this team. And, as good as Trace Jackson-Davis has been, he's been unbelievable playing to an All-American status already. But we know that Xavier Johnson is kind of the hit and miss guy. If he plays well, Indiana most likely wins. But in the times where he turned the ball over a lot last season, Indiana didn't do too well. So for me, it's the bench depth and the guys that can take the ball up the floor. A lot of other things that I want to see a bit more of. We're only 4 games in. There's still a lot of things that need to be worked out. And of course, the gauntlet of the non-con is just ahead of us, beginning in just 8 days when UNC comes to town. But I like what I'm seeing so far from Indiana. They have not really made the games that shouldn't be close very close. They played really well, kind of late in the first halves. Got off to a couple slow starts. Morehead State got hit some lucky shots, and Miami, Ohio was a bit sloppy because of that 48-hour turnaround. But they're handling their business, and they're looking like a top 15 team, and they're knocking on the door in the top 10.
Absolutely, man. Everything you said is spot on, man. So I was excited to see Indiana play, at Xavier because it was a true road test. Hadn't won a road game in umpteen years. And everybody was excited to see but the one thing I noticed that stood out to me the most was how old and mature Indiana really is. You look at their core group. I mean, Miller Kopp has been around 4 years. Trace Jackson-Davis has been around 4 years. Race Thompson has been around 4 or 5 years. Xavier Johnson has been around 4 or 5 years. I mean, their experience and their patience really showed on the road. They were efficient. They were able to get the ball right where they wanted to get it. They always threw it inside. They knew there was going to be a double team coming, and they played off of it to almost to perfection. It's like to see them still knock down a lot of these open shots that they're still missing. I think against as the competition level goes up, they're going to have to make those shots as they hit those true road tests in the Big Ten. You're going to have to make those shots. And I have my own theory about shooting. You only miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And I don't think the shooters don't get a lot of shots, so they're forced to be extremely efficient. And I'm not sure outside of Miller Kopp who's extremely efficient and whose shooting percentages are a result of volume shooting. So they don't get a lot. So it's unfair for the people who say they can't shoot. It's like, well, they don't get a lot of shots. So, but I do understand that, that's the way the system is run in Indiana. But I would like to see them knock down more shots in that area. What are some of the things that stood out to you most in the Xavier game?
I think it was the fact that, you mentioned the maturity and the fact that they went into it. That was a raucous atmosphere. That was one that, if you close your eyes, you would have thought it was a Big Ten game. That's how loud that place was. And there were times where it felt like Indiana was, almost out of the game in a sense. It was, 7 points at one point in the first half, and Indiana slowly, they fought back. It was an unbelievable play from Trace Jackson-Davis, 30 points. I mean, he played the way he needed to, and Xavier Johnson had some huge shots as well. You're absolutely right in terms of the 3-point shooting, and this was the biggest thing last year. Indiana created so many open shots last year, and they just didn't knock them down, and it's because they didn't have enough. And the more shots that you're going to get, you're going to end up knocking more of them down. And we saw that, Miller Kopp took 4 threes in that game, missed the first 3, and then hit that one late, which really, I don't want to say sealed the deal because it came down to the last few seconds, but that was a huge shot. So it's the fact that Indiana needs to get more shots from the outside. They're eventually going to knock them down. And there were too many times last year where Miller Kopp just didn't touch the ball in the second half in some big games. And that was one of the biggest things. And, we can't forget that Parker Stewart, their best 3-point shooter, is now gone. So that's one of the biggest things. And there's reasons why, maybe the experts or some people in the Big Ten inside think that, maybe Indiana was not as as good as a true contender, considering what they were last year, and they brought over 85% of their scoring back in the minutes. So I think that was a big concern. But you need to get more shots from the outside, and I get it. You can rely on Trayce Jackson-Davis and Xavier Johnson in games you need to, like this one, considering and those are the veterans. They've been around. They know the team like the back of their hand, and they did what they need to do to get that win. But going forward in environments that are going to be even more rowdy in the Big Ten, you need more scoring than Johnson and Trayce Jackson-Davis and a little bit of Malik Renew in there, who had an awesome game and had over 10 points.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is threes are, B2s at the end of the day. I know, especially in those games where as we get into the UNCs and we get into the guts of the schedule, the players are to ultimately just get better. They're going to be at a higher level. They're going to be athletically at a higher level. They're going to be skill-wise at a higher level. And I know people kind of are tired of hearing it, but you have to combat that by making your own set of three-point shots as well too, to become so that could become the great equalizer. It's great that I know Trayce. I think Trayce is shooting a whopping like 70-some% from the field. Like these are layups. But as the competition grows and the front lines get bigger and stronger, then they're not just going to give you layups. It's just not going to happen. So we have to, and that leads me into one of my the areas of improvement. I really feel is, and you talked about the depth of the bench, and I think that's mostly because of Malik Renew, but I'm a little bit disappointed in the backcourt as far as their production in these games. And some of these games, a lot of games are a little easier, especially the Xavier game where, we didn't, take Tamar Bates. He has to be special. JHS has to be special. They have to come out and they have to command in instances where TJD is not in the game or there are shot clock situations where they have to be creative, get in the lane, get fouled, get to the free throw line, or create for teammates. I haven't seen that yet, and I think that's going to be the key to whether they stay at a Big Ten championship level or national championship level. Those two guys, no, I know JHS is not off the bench, but Tamar Bates, he has to really, really show up, coming off of that bench. He has to really, because we heard good things about him prior to the season, even from, Coach Ya, and they all talked about Tamar. And, I'm like, okay, Tamar, you have to turn back this clock. We got to get you to high school. We got to get you back aggressive. We got to get you back attacking. You're thinking too much. You have to, as a young player in the Big Ten, you have to be extremely confident in what you're doing. You have to be patient, but you also have to take advantage of your opportunities when you get them. And that's one the area of concern for me with the team is that backcourt, because Geronimo's been fighting a knee injury. That's tough. What I want to see more of is CJ Gunn. I've seen I followed his maturation the last 2 years doing this podcast and just watching some of these young guys come up. And he seemed to me to be what IU was missing, a guy that can really stretch the floor, take some shots, knock them in, create some shots, get hot. You know what I mean? And along with Bates, they have to become that two tandem of guys that gets a lot of production for Indiana in that backcourt off of the bench. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the CJ Gunn point is an awesome one because in terms of, I was looking at, other than Jalen Hood-Schifino, who we knew full well going in, he was going to be a starter. He was going to replace Parker Stewart with the other four guys being the same. But then it was like, well, who's going to get the most minutes after that? And we figured Malik Renew, considering that he looks a lot like Trayce Jackson-Davis in these games from last year where he's on the post. He can get it to that left hand of his. He's got solid footwork. I mean, he's a huge guy. I mean, you look at him, you're like, wow, he could, literally eat you up down low. And we've seen that. And the maturation of him, I think just from when he's gotten to Indiana, let's not forget, he was initially committed to Florida. And then I think Hood-Schifino was a big reason why he came to Indiana, considering, the Montverde connection in high school. But I think seeing him progress and working against Race Thompson and Trayce Jackson-Davis in practice has paid off. But CJ Gunn had an awesome game against Miami when the starters really struggled, came off the bench. He's got that really nice shot of his, that little runner from mid-range, which is something that Indiana really didn't have a ton of last year. We know that Tamar Bates, could hit that shot. He's a three-point shooter. He's supposed to be at least, a five-star recruit. You're supposed to be, at least a decent three-point shooter. And, Bates, I think, is trying to work a bit more on his defense. That was a big problem for him last year, which is why he probably didn't get the minutes he wanted wanted. We know
Right.
Mike Woodson, his teams are always about defense,
Yeah.
as they should be, considering, last year it was a team that was not great shooting, coming off the year before. And Woodson knew that. And of course, he's a defensive wizard. We saw that with his time with the Pistons and the Knicks. But the fact that Gunn had an unbelievable, showing off the bench, I think he's going to get a lot more minutes when, guys like Galloway's a bit injured right now. Mentioned Geronimo.
Yeah.
These guys are all trying to work out. And Woodson said that he doesn't believe in kind of the 1 through 5. He just wants to have 5 guys on the floor and have them, kind of play together. And as you like to say, just kind of play free basketball. Don't
Yeah.
have
Like
certain
that.
amount of sets and just try and play freely and get it to work, because the 5 guys on the floor Woodson's going to put out are pretty good and they're all capable of doing different things. So I love what Gunn has brought off the bench. It takes a ton of pressure off of Galloway and Geronimo and Bates as well. So hey, it's already, we're seeing 3 freshmen make a really big impact on this team, which is huge if they want to fulfill their aspirations of, hanging at least one more banner in Assembly Hall.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned a key name was Geronimo, and I think he's got to be key in joining Bates and Gunn in that second unit. Now that Galloway is fighting some type of injury, he has the potential to be a starter in any other team in the country. So he has to come in and continue to bring that energy that's been off and on this year. So I think he's going to be a big key as well. I forgot to mention his name. But the thing that Indiana's done well, man, they continue to defend. They're holding opponents easily to under 30%. I mean, 30% shooting. They're rebounding that mess out the ball. I don't understand how a team expects to get a rebound with Race going after it, Trace going after it, Malik going after it, and shooting, even Xavier going in there and getting them. So there aren't too many rebounds to get for anybody, and they've done a great job of not only holding teams to one shot, but getting the rebound and getting out. So, obviously they're scoring 90 points a game, but it's 3 of the 4 games have been against guys that they should score 90 points against. So they had 81 in the Xavier game. That was impressive. Even without shooting great and making a lot of threes, they still had 81 points. And if you're not going to make a lot of threes, then you have to get fouled and get to the free throw line a lot. And that's going to be key as they go forward too. So, there are a lot of positive. We always tend to harp on what we don't see. We absolutely love what we do see, but just like anything else, we want to continue to grow. We want to continue to get better. We want to see that development. I wanted to talk about earlier. Is like, my favorite part of college basketball is the off season, because everybody's doing this. They're talking about how good how they've been in the gym and they're getting all these shots up. It sounds great, but I want you to show me. And I want to see, who's been working on their game, see who's improving in areas, who's gotten stronger, who's got more athletic, who's doing, who's improving on the court and off the court. So, I think Indiana is in prime shape to continue to grow. I kind of shun the championship talk. I mean, it's too early to be talking, we going to the Final Four, or we'll win it, banner number 6. That sounds cool. It's a lot that goes into that. It's a long, long season for those players, man. So what other areas have you seen positive growth in Indiana basketball?
I think, just mentioning before, the fact that a lot of different guys can take the ball up the floor, and the fact that they're kind of scoring in different ways. This year, we saw it felt like Trace Jackson Davis every time would get the ball in the low post and be able to just kind of go up and score. And we saw that it was kind of a problem of his going into Big Ten play, where he's going against bigger guys, where it's harder for him to get around these guys. But the fact that Indiana is getting the ball in different places with him, on the baseline where he can drive, go down low, and create a different shot. We talk about Jackson Davis's physicality. He's got some of the best footwork I've seen really in college basketball. And there's a reason why, he's always up there, considering he still isn't all that comfortable taking a mid-range shot. It's the fact they're getting him the ball in different positions, and they're scoring in different ways, and they're finding a way to get the job done. And I think it's the fact that they can balance out the scoring a bit more. Jalen Hood-Schifino, I don't think we've seen him fully do his potential yet. I want to see him try and get to the basket a little bit more. We know that mid-range of his is so deadly. And, if he makes a 3 once in a while, then great. That's, kind of free money, because we knew coming in, as great as he was going to be for Indiana, he was not going to be a prolific three-point scorer. And we've kind of seen that a little bit. He had a big one against Xavier, but I think they can score in different ways. They're much more deep. There's so much less pressure on the guys. But hey, when adversity strikes, like we saw against Xavier, Johnson and TJD can show up and put their best effort in and can kind of steal one for Indiana, because that was a gutsy win. That was such a back and forth game. You didn't think that Indiana would pull it out considering what we saw on the road last year, and that was a huge win considering some other Big Ten teams are getting big wins in tournaments, and there was a lot of speculation already, which, as you mentioned, is still November. There's still 4 months before Indiana hopes to still be playing in March Madness, but that they silenced the haters with that big win and kind of put themselves back on the map in terms of a Big Ten contender.
Absolutely, man. And you make great points, man. I think all Indiana fans were sitting there waiting on the collapse. You know what I mean? And when Miller hit that shot, I felt like, oh, they got this one. It's not easy going forward, but it's their game to lose now. They're not just going to lose the game. So, you have to be strong, tough-minded. That's where you develop the camaraderie and the attitude is on that road. When you can silence that crowd, you can walk out of there with a win. And a place like Xavier was was probably the toughest place to play in the Big East, and because I've watched that rivalry for years with Cincinnati and how that thing is going. I knew going there to be a great road test. And they have a good team and good coach. Sean Miller is no slouch when it comes to coaching basketball. That was a hell of a win for Indiana basketball. So, so far, man, they're averaging about 89 points a game. They're shooting 37% from three. I think last year they attempted about 5.8 threes a game. I'm sorry, they made about 5.8 threes per game. And this year they're sitting right at 6. So, this is an area that's really crucial to me. And when the competition continues to grow and they run into those teams that are a little more fast paced and they make threes, you have to figure out a way to match that. And I think that's definitely an area of improvement. I think we talked about it earlier. X is shooting, batting 1,000 when it comes to making threes. Cobb sitting at 53%, but Bates and JHS are at 30%, and Gunn is at 20%. I know Gunn hasn't had much run, and he's gonna improve as he continues to play. But those numbers have to get better from those guys coming off the bench and making shots. I think at Xavier, TJD showed a lot of maturity, man, on the road, and he led that charge. And once again, we want to say how proud we are of Indiana basketball and winning that basketball game. Forget the numbers, forget the stats. Ultimately forget everything we're talking about, but we want those guys to be proud of it and going into an environment like that and win it. Finally, man, as we wrap this podcast up, man, you give me your keys, I'm gonna give you my keys, for Indiana basketball to make a run for a championship season, man. And number one for me is starting off with those 3-point makes and attempts. We got to get those up. We can't make 6 threes a game and think we're gonna beat teams like Arizona and we might beat them on the road in Arizona, but the tournament is full of energy, and the energy is fast paced and it makes you move fast. So you have to keep up with that, and that's why we need to make those threes. But we have to take more. We can't be afraid to take that shot. I played for Bob Knight, one of the most disciplined, strict coaches you can ever, and he let me go because he knew that I was going to take good shots and I was going to take tough shots, but I was going to make some of those tough shots because I have proven that I can make them and take them. If as a scorer and as a guy on that wing, you have to create basketball plays. You can't rely on TJD and the system to create shots for you. I think that's going to be key. We talked about the bench, the backcourt, Gunn, Bates, Galloway. He's injured, so we're going to throw Geronimo in there. They have to come up big and provide more punch scoring, continue the defensive prowess that they're providing, and get that game going up and down, and continue to lock down, the other team's second unit and create that separation for when the starters come back in. Maintaining the defensive excellence against the good teams. We've talked about keeping those numbers down, but unfortunately, we've only played one solid basketball team so far. Numbers are great. If we can keep those numbers, where they are now. They're holding opponents to 33% shooting from three. They're holding opponents down points wise. We got to continue that trend against the upper talent. So that's what's making our defense look good right now in the ratings. Number 4 is continue to win on the road. Tend to prove people that you can win basketball games on the road. There's no greater feeling than a true road win. Outside of, I'm sure, a national championship and a Big Ten championship, the third best is winning on the road. So winning on the road and proving that, I think we go to Arizona, if I'm correct, And I can't wait to see that game. Watching Arizona last night, I'm like, man, I can't wait to see when we stand against teams like this. And then finally continue to be defensively dominant and dominate the backboard. I think that's a true strength. And you mentioned it earlier, true strength of Indiana basketball is rebounding, but they have to capitalize on it by, pushing the basketball and getting easy baskets because of our defense. I remember watching in the last 3 years before Mike Woodson, and I said I used to always comment about how we would get stops. Good defensive team, but we would get the rebound and walk the ball up the court and then try to run a set. And it's like, it doesn't work like that, college basketball. You have to be able to create offense off of your defense, and that's going to separate you from the rest of the pack. And if we're not able to do that, if I see us getting great stops and energy stops and holding teams at 65 points, but then we get the rebound and we wait on our bigs to walk up the floor and we looking at the coach to find out what set he wants to run, then we don't have a championship basketball team. We have a team that's relying on the coach, and that's what you can't have in order to win basketball games. So, those are my top 5 keys. You give me your keys and what you think is going to, as you've seen the 4 games, now, what do you think are the keys for this team to make a strong run at the end?
I'll pick up right where you left off, AJ. You made a good point about, in terms of the pace. And it felt like every time last year, Indiana gets a stop, Trace gets a rebound, and then waits for everyone to clear out, gives the ball to X. And by the time he crosses the timeline, you're already losing, 5 to 8 seconds off the shot clock, which is a big reason why I think Indiana struggled and kind of threw up some bad shots at the end. I'll begin with that. And I think the biggest thing is pacing. If Indiana can control the pace, Mike Woodson said last year, Indiana played their best basketball when they played fast. But when you play fast, it can lead to turnovers. We saw Xavier Johnson really struggle with that a little bit last season. So if Indiana can play faster, he wants to do that more. He didn't do that, I don't think. Maybe there were times maybe he did it too much last year, and there were times he didn't do it enough. I think if Indiana finds that right balance between playing fast, using all the different guys that can bring the ball up the floor, and then going inside and creating that pass to the outside, Xavier Johnson can get to the lane and kick it out and get a good shot from Miller Kopp, get a good chance from someone else to shoot a 3. If, we see like someone like Galloway, whose shot I think has really improved over the summer. I know he hasn't played too much. We mentioned the injury, but he looks much more comfortable shooting the ball, which is important. I think the biggest thing, one, is pacing. I think if Indiana controls the pace, they can play it slow at times. We know that. We saw that a lot last season. But if they push the pace like they did a little bit so far in these first few games, that's huge. And that's how you go win on the road, AJ, as you mentioned it. If you can control the pace, silence the crowd, and play your own game. And it felt like at times Indiana was playing to the way Xavier wanted to, which is why they struggled a bit in that first half. That was a big reason, but they turned that around. So for me, it's pacing, number 1. And then, I'll give you 2 more, which is kind of on the flip side of each other. It's fouling and free throws. I think the biggest thing, 1, is free throws. Indiana was not great last year. We won't sugarcoat it. And they were, kind of putrid at times from shooting free throws. And, you figured they'd have to work on that over the summer. And you knew that going into the first few games, it wasn't going to be perfect. It's not going to completely turn around. You can't just work on foul shots and then, get a bunch of people screaming at you and expect to make all of them. But that's important. They need to make those. And, the big ones at the end of that Xavier game, Malik Reneau missed them both. And he made that big defensive play on the other end to redeem himself. But that's one where it kind of felt like the Illinois end to the Big Ten, that quarterfinal game where they missed a free throw and Illinois nearly won that game with a layup. Kind of felt like the same thing. So for me, it's free throws. And the other one's discipline. It's making sure you don't get into foul trouble. This was a problem last year. We talked about there wasn't a ton of bench depth, but there were times where Xavier Johnson would commit, a silly foul, maybe a frustration foul that would take him out of the ball game, or Trace, gets beat up down low and commits 2 fouls early. We saw that against Purdue in that game they won. He didn't really play that many minutes because he was always in foul trouble.
Yep.
I think that's a big thing. And then it's discipline. The technical fouls, I looked them over again. Whether there were technical fouls or not is up for debate. I really don't think so. Xavier Johnson, we know how the energy he brings to the team and how important that is. And then, of course, Malik Reneau had one as well. But it's staying out of foul trouble. It's making sure you don't commit those silly technical fouls and allowing a home crowd like that to really get into your head almost. So for me, it's foul shots, free throws, staying out of the foul trouble. And then if you can control the pace, Indiana can move much more up tempo this year, which I think opens up a lot more things than we saw last year. Then they can play very well. And they're showing a lot of, really good things in the first, 4 games now. And they're very impressively 4-0.
Absolutely, man. I mean, just some numbers: 38 holding opponents, 38% shooting from the field, 30% from 3. They're getting to the line 93 times to their opponents 45 times. They're out rebounding their opponents by 10. And they're holding their opponents under 60 points per game, 59 points a game. So everything is trending in the right direction, man. Like you said, great points about discipline. I was never a player who cared what the bench said or what anybody said or showing up anybody. I just wanted to try to win the game. That mentality is important on the road because those little things can easily distract you from the goal. You instead of you worrying about what the next play is, the coach is talking about your behavior or what you did, your gesturing or whatever it is. So I think they overcame that, and that what was awesome about it. But this being smart, being in the game. I think the key to being, on the road in the Big Ten and then on the road period is to be there at the end, be within 6 points at the end. And it gives you a chance to win the basketball game because a lot of the times the home team tightens up a little bit, crowd gets restless, and that works in your favor. If you can maintain that, stay solid defensively, keep your key players out of foul trouble in the game, you have a chance to win every single game this year, man. So, and I kind of tweeted yesterday, I'm looking forward to seeing, looking ahead in the Big Ten slate, man. I watch Illinois play, I'm watching, Purdue play, I watch Ohio State play. I'm like, man, this is going to be, it's not as cut and dry as people think it is. I mean, these teams are even. These teams are all really good. They're all well coached when you talk. And that's one thing the Big Ten has had the best tactical coaches that you can find. And from that time where Bob Knight and Gene Katie was going at it with the young Tom Izzo, or today with an older Tom Izzo with Chris Holtman and Matt Painter going at it. It's going to be so difficult to just rely on one thing to win the Big Ten. And, I think Indiana has a chance to continue to grow in a lot of different areas. So in order to be there at the end, they got to grow in those areas, man. So, man, thank you, man. It was awesome to sit here and talk Indiana basketball with my man, Austin Platt, man, who's going to be a superstar in the business one day, if not today. So, man, if you continue to please, click on that link, follow the House of Hoosier podcast. You can find it on the Field of 68 network on YouTube. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple. There are many different ways you can access our content as we continue to bring special guests on the show. We'll offer our analysis, too, as we're watching the game as well. So anything to go before we go, Austin?
Just building off your last point, latest AP poll drop. There's 6 Big Ten teams in the top 25. To quickly, you mentioned that the Big Ten, everyone thinks of the last 2 marches, they kind of disappointed, underwhelmed, and suddenly they're back. And you talked about, Illinois and Purdue. I looked at Michigan. It looks like they're going to get some outside scoring from Jet Howard, Juwan's son, their head coach. And then I look at Michigan State, man. I watched some of their games, and they're going to be a dangerous team. I figured Michigan State or Ohio State is kind of going to sneak into maybe that top 4. I think Illinois, Indiana are still clear-cut 1-2. And then I think one of those teams might sneak in. I think Michigan and Purdue might have a little bit more work to do, but it's been exciting Big Ten, and there are going to be a lot of opportunities for Indiana to really bolster that schedule, or rather that resume, whether it be non-conference or conference, something we really didn't see a ton of last year. There weren't a lot of great non-conference opportunities to win games, but this year they're kind of all lined up right in a row, and it's going to start pretty soon. But you hit the nail right on the head. It's still not as clear-cut. Anything can happen. I mean, it's Big Ten basketball, but it's exciting, and if we get a bunch of teams that are winning games in the non-con, that's going to make it for a fun conference schedule come the new year.
I mean, you're talking about going into Rutgers and trying to get a win. You're talking about going to Purdue, trying to get a win, going to Wisconsin, trying to get a win, going to Michigan State, trying to get a win. All these different places, all these different schools have to go in. Iowa is a sleeper in the conference, man. That gym can lull you to sleep and have you down by 10 before you know it. Michigan, Michigan's always, got that energy. They can play well like they did in Assembly Hall last year after Indiana's big win against Purdue, but then they can, take Ohio to, I think it was Ohio. They went to, overtime with what? No, I'm sorry. Was it Michigan?
Ohio State. Yeah, that was the game that they had at the end and then completely lost in an OT.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just so much parity within the league, man. And I was just excited about it. I'm like, man, this is going to be really fun to watch. But I'm still picking my Hoosiers to overcome and be there in the end. That's all I want you to give yourself an opportunity to be there in the mix in the end. To what they call it, to have it in your own hands and your own destiny in your own hands, and you lose the opportunity and not somebody take it from you. So once again, thank you for listening to the House of Hoosier podcast. We are excited about the new season, man. Looking forward to bringing you more exclusive content here, representing the Field 68 Network. Go find that, click the link.